NOx emissions. So, for reducing the NOx emissions, so HC is taken care of by these two factors, and EGR is used for NOx emission reduction. So, in order to reduce the NOx emissions, EGR is employed, and you are using actually high volume EGR, large volumes of EGR put back into the engine. So, once you are putting large volume of EGR, first the exhaust quantity that you are putting into the atmosphere goes down. Second thing that happens is that the NOx emissions also go down. Okay. So, although EGR has long been known to permit the reduction in NOx emissions, its use in conventional petrol engines has been limited by the fact that it hinders the combustion. So, in conventional MPFI engines, EGR is actually limited to 10 to 15%. Okay. But in high volume EGR is used in the GDI engine, and you can, it's because it is more stable combustion comparatively. So, with the GDI engine, the high density of the air fuel mixture in the combustion area makes it possible to utilize high volume EGR without endangering the combustion stability. As a result, the GDI engine reduces the NOx emission levels by using EGRs up to 60 to 70% EGR you can actually use. No other engine other than GDI, not even diesel engine, can use such a high level of EGR. So, you see here this curve shows NOx emissions and no numbers are shown here. So, it is just a qualitative figure, and here you have the EGR levels. So, if you are using a conventional MPFI engine, you see as soon as you start increasing, this is green curve. Okay. So, more than 15% EGR in a conventional engine, you will start running into combustion stability issues. More than 15% you do not use in a MPFI engine. And you can see the shade in the green. So, shade in the green shows the stability of combustion. So, that means conventional engine, as soon as you start reaching close to 15%, you will start running into problem. Lesser the EGR, more stable will be the combustion in case of a conventional engine. Okay. Whereas, if you look at the GDI engine you can go all the way to 60-70%. With 15% EGR, you can only reduce this much from here to here. With 60% EGR, you can reduce from here to here. You can almost reduce 80-90% NOx emissions with very high volume. So, additional NOx reduction is possible with high volume EGR because of the stable combustion in GDI engines. Make sense? But still, you see, you will be emitting some NOx, and you do not like to have some NOx, you want to kill that also. So, I will tell you how to kill that, right. So, EGR is conducted to reduce the level of NOx emitted into the engine exhaust. The greater the load on the engine, the lower will be the volume of the EGR utilized. So, you use at high loads, you use lower NOx EGR levels actually. So, if you want to kill the rest of the EGR, you actually use lean NOx catalytic converters that facilitate elimination of whatever leftover NOx even from the lean mixture emissions. Okay. So, lean NOx catalytic converter currently comes in two varieties. Again, I just want to introduce you, I will give you details later on. First variety I have already told you, which is lean NOx trap, okay, also called LNT. The other one is called selective catalytic reduction. Selective catalytic reduction, in selective catalytic is called SCR. Selective catalytic reduction is a technology in which we are using urea. Urea, what is the chemical formula of urea? NH2CONH2, if you remember class 10 notes. So, NH2CONH2 plus H2O, when you put water in it, when you hydrolyze, make the solution of urea. So, NH2CONH2 plus H2O is 2NH3 plus CO2. So, that means urea molecule can be split into two molecules of ammonia and one molecule of carbon dioxide. You let carbon dioxide go into the atmosphere. You are interested in ammonia. Why you are interested in ammonia? Ammonia is a very, very strong reductant. And what do you want to reduce? You want to reduce NOx into nitrogen. So, you let ammonia fight with the NOx and kill the NOx, and in the process get killed. So, NH3 plus NO2 is nitrogen plus water, right. But you also have to understand that NO2 is a big problem, but NH3 if it goes into the atmosphere is a bigger problem. So, you should not get into a situation where you have a rat in the house, you bring the cat, and then the cat create problem, you bring a dog, and when the dog creates problem, you bring an elephant, and then elephant breaks your house. Okay. So, you have to basically kill the NOx and you have to kill the ammonia, and at the end you put some catalyst that if there is any leftover ammonia which is not killed, you finish it. So, all that war between NOx and ammonia has to happen within inside the tailpipe. No soldier of both the armies should escape. Okay. So, it is a very interesting fight that I will discuss in detail when I discuss the SCR and LNT. So, the later, that means the lean NOx trap have been proven to be highly effective when new, but their viability is considerably reduced with petrol with high sulfur content. So, you see this lean NOx trap actually uses some kind of metal carbonates, okay, base metal carbonates, lithium, barium, magnesium carbonates. And so, when NOx comes, the carbonates get converted to nitrates and carbon dioxide is released. But unfortunately, if you have sulfur in the fuel, what happens is carbonates and nitrates both are unstable. So, you can convert carbonate to nitrate, nitrate to carbonate, and this happens. This is called process of adsorption. The problem happens when you have sulfur in the fuel, and once you have sulfur in the fuel, sulfur dioxide is produced. And when sulfur dioxide reacts with these, it becomes barium sulfate. Okay. So, barium sulfate, all these base metal sulfates are very stable compounds. So, they become permanent. So, whatever carbonate you have, now it gets converted to sulfate, and now there is no more carbonate available for adsorption. So, basically your adsorption efficiency reduces and their effectiveness reduces with time. So, then you have to purge the sulfur dioxide using high temperature heating, and then lot of associated problems. So, this is highly effective when it is new, but if you are using high sulfur fuel, its viability is lower. So, in contrast, SCR type are less effective in early stages, but they do not get affected by the sulfur. So, if you are in a country where the fuel sulfur is less than 10 ppm, there you will definitely use NOx trap. But if you are in a country where, like India, where there is high sulfur in the fuel, you will use SCR type. So, Mitsubishi has decided to offer appropriate lean NOx catalyst, one of these two with a GDI engine, depending on the sulfur content in the region in which the engines will be used. And this shows actually both the solutions. You see here, this is the NOx conversion efficiency from 0% to 100%. This is the vehicle speed in kilometer per hour, and you see this is the efficiency of NOx trap, okay, and this is the efficiency of selective catalytic reduction. So, looking at this, what will you prefer? You will prefer to have NOx trap because it is more efficient. But see what happens if you keep running before the endurance test. If you keep using in a place where you have 200 ppm sulfur, after 80,000 kilometer, this is maintained at the same level. But this one which was looking attractive now is here. Okay. So, 200 ppm sulfur content after 80,000 kilometer, your performance of the NOx trap will become abysmally poor. Okay. So, basically you see what technology, exhaust gas after treatment technology you are going to use, to a large extent depends on what kind of emission, what kind of fuel specifications you have in a particular geographical region. Okay. The technology, this technology which will be extremely successful in Holland, in Scandinavian countries, because there ppm sulfur is less than 10, will not be so successful in India, just because of one spec of the gasoline. Optical diagnostics, and
Optical diagnostics is extremely important for engines, and optical diagnostics is an area which has come up in last 20 years. For last more than 100 years, I mean, you know, engines were invented around 1880, 1890, and since then what is happening inside the combustion chamber was really a matter of speculation. Why? Because we were not able to see the processes that are happening inside the engine combustion chamber, because the combustion chamber was made of metal and you can't see through the metal, and the processes are happening really fast. So, even if you are able to see through somehow using some optical window, you can't make sense out of it, because the processes are happening in extremely fast time, extremely quickly. Okay. They are extremely fast. But now you see, in last couple of decades, there has been tremendous progress in terms of materials. So, high strength temperature, high strength, high temperature materials which are transparent, those have been developed, such as quartz. So, that made it possible to have some windows inside the engine combustion chamber, or even now in the optical engines you can even make a segment of the combustion chamber of quartz and you can actually see. The second thing that has happened in last couple of decades is that there has been tremendous progress in high speed photography. Earlier the cameras were very slow, and now you have cameras which are taking 500,000 frames per second with a get time of nanoseconds. So, practically even the very fast processes that are happening in millisecond or fractions of milliseconds, those can also be captured very, very nicely on the photographic films. So, if you have to understand a phenomena, for example, the one that is happening inside the engine combustion chamber, what you do is you capture the phenomena at a very fast frame speed using a high speed camera, and once you have done the recording, you can play it slow. So, that means if you capture something at 50,000 frames per second and you play it at 50 frames per second, so the event will now look 1000 times slower, and therefore, you will be able to look at all the details of what are the processes happening. So, these are some of the developments that have taken place, and that has given the advent to the birth of, that has led to the birth of optical diagnostics, especially in the area of internal combustion engines. Okay. The other thing is that, you know, in last couple of decades, there has been a huge awareness in the public about the environmental implications of using fossil fuels in the engines, right. There has been tremendous, IC engines have been a tremendous source of pollutants being emitted. How the pollutants are formed? So far it was just anybody's guess. Okay, you spray the fuel spray actually interacts with the air, it burns, it leads to formation of pollutants. Some of the pollutants get destroyed inside the engine combustion chamber, some of them don't. Those who don't, they come out in the exhaust. But this whole thing that was happening inside the combustion chamber was a matter of speculation. With the optical diagnostics, you have been able to see. In the engine, if you look at the engine, the most important process that really controls the efficiency of an engine and also the formation of pollutants is actually the mixing of fuel with the air. How well you can mix the fuel with the air, that is going to control how well it is going to burn, and that is also going to control how well how much will be the efficiency and how much pollutants you will be producing. For example, if you have extremely well mixed fuel air mixture, obviously there will be less possibility of particulate formation in such a mixture, right. If you have extremely well mixed mixture, there may not be high temperature zones, and so therefore the NOx emissions may be low. Okay. If the mixture is not really mixed well and there are pockets of high temperature, high fuel concentration, then obviously the fuel will not burn, because in that localized zone enough air is not available. So, it will lead to formation of particulate matter, particulate matter, hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide. Okay. So, you can see that this process of fuel air mixing is extremely important, and it controls the fuel thermal efficiency of the engine and pollutant formation. And we could not understand anything about it. It was just a matter of speculation until 2 decades ago. You increase the fuel injection pressure, something you measure in the exhaust. So, you tweak some parameter, whatever you have in your hand, and then measure at the tailpipe. Okay. If you increase the pressure, emissions are changing, HC may go down, CO may go up. Okay. So, you basically there was a cause, there was a effect, but then what is happening inside, that science was really not known very well. With the optical diagnostics, we are able to understand what is the science that is going behind. Okay. So, there is a increasing environmental problem, and it is leading to more and more stringent emission control norms. I would just give you an example. Emission norm started around 1972. It started from California. Lot of cars, wealthy place, California, Hollywood, lot of people are rich in Bay Area. So, that is the place where the number of cars became extremely high in 1972, and there were no pollution norms at that time. So, when the concentration of the cars increased, people obviously felt the pinch of increasing pollution. You come out in the morning from your house, go to your office, as soon as you go to the roads, you have all the smoke and foul smell, and obviously different types of pollutants which are not really so good for your health. So, first time the California norms came into the picture, they established the first emission norms, and then of course, they kept on tightening the norms year after year. In India, the emission norms were first made in 1992 for two-wheelers. Okay. So, since 1972 to 2017, in all parts of the world, the emission norms have been evolving. So, now you see there was first we introduced some norms, and then there came Bharat stage 1, then Bharat stage 2, Bharat stage 3, now Bharat stage 4. These are basically nothing but Euro norms which are tweaked a little bit for the Indian conditions. Euro norms and Bharat norms, the only difference is that in Europe, the vehicles are driving at a fast speed. So, the driving cycles in which the emission measurement is done is faster. In India, it is impossible to run car at 120 kilometers an hour, right. So, in India, we reduced that speed to 90 kilometers an hour and kept the number more or less same. There is some tweaking. So, Bharat norms and Euro norms, they are close cousins, very, very close cousins. Okay. So, the problem is that now we are going to go for stringent emission legislations. I will tell you that Bharat stage 1 to Bharat stage 4, we have already, or initial Euro norms to final Euro norms, we have already reduced the emissions of different species somewhere between 90% to 95%. That means one car at that time was giving pollution which today 20 cars give. So, the cars have already been cleaned quite a bit, okay. But with every norm that come into the picture, we tighten the numbers and we try to bring it to half, but there is a limit, you can tighten it, but obviously the emission norms, I mean the pollutants, pollutant formation is very basic fundamental of the combustion. If there is a combustion, there will be some pollutant formation. If you want to tighten the numbers, it is going to cost time and money. So, now with more and more stringent emission norms, more and more exhaust gas after treatment is being introduced, and after treatment, as I said earlier also, is a very expensive proposition, because in most cases you have to use precious metals such as platinum, and you know why you would not like to put the platinum in the exhaust pipe. Okay. So, there is a demand for minimizing fuel consumption. Apart from the harmful pollutants, there is a big pressure on automotive engineers and designers to control the CO2 emissions as well. CO2 is the most harmless gas that is emitted by IC engines. In fact, you want that all the hydrocarbons that you are putting in should actually be converted into CO2. So, when you are wearing the hat of a IC engine person, you say that CO2 is the least harmful and you would like all the fuel to get converted to CO2, but when you wear the hat of an environmentalist, you say that this CO2 should also be low. So, if you want to have low CO emissions, but low CO2 emission does not mean that you should have more CO, more HC, more NOx and more PM. That is not the way in which you want to control the CO2. Okay? So, there is a difference. So, how can you control the CO2? So, CO2 you can control by increasing the thermal efficiency of the engine. If you have a highly efficient engine, it will be consuming lesser amount of fuel per kilometer of travel, and therefore, it will be generating lesser amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Okay. So, now there are efficiency norms that have also come into the picture other than the emission norms. So, in order to, these are the two driving forces, emission norms and efficiency norms. If you want to meet them, so far we have managed by tweaking the parameters here and there, but now the norms are getting so stringent that it is not possible to meet those numbers without really understanding what is happening inside the combustion chamber. So, now you need to look into each of the process that is happening in the engine. So, therefore, you need to have better understanding of the in-cylinder processes and to simulate fuel injection and combustion in the cylinder. So, there are many things that are being done. I think in the lab visit yesterday, you must have seen that we have spray bombs. So, in the spray bomb basically we create end of the compression stroke conditions by pressurizing the chamber and then we inject. We do not have temperature there, that is one shortcoming, we do not have heated chamber. There are heated chambers in some places, okay. We will also build one chamber like that, okay. And then we will be able to create same temperature, same pressure, but then it will still not be IC engine combustion chamber, because in IC engines you have lot of swirl and turbulence, and these are quiescent chambers, air is more or less. But anyway, having said that, it is even in that chamber, if you do experiments, you can simulate fuel injection and combustion process of an engine, and then you can, using high speed photography, you can look at how the fuel droplets are getting generated, how they are interacting with the air, how they are vaporizing, what is their size distribution, how that size distribution is changing with time. So, all these things can be actually understood using optical diagnostics. So, basically to use optical diagnostic technique to visualize the in-cylinder process is extremely critical, and even for simulation results to be verified experimentally, optical diagnostics are essential. So, some people use CFD, computational fluid dynamics, for understanding these spray processes. You can simulate sprays, you can simulate the droplet size distribution using CFD. You can even use codes like ChemKin, which basically talk about the chemical kinetics of the droplet when it evaporates and it interacts with the air, and then combustion starts and then pollutants form. All that can be simulated. But if you are using a model is using some governing equation which tries to capture the physical behavior, but it is not. How do you make sure that it is actually capturing the right behavior from a real fluid? So, what you do, you need to, for every modeling result or every simulation result, it will be worthless unless and until it is compared with the experimental results. So, what you do is you make a model and you, under standard conditions, you generate some data using model, and under the same conditions you perform the experiments. Experimental results are absolutely gold standard, because this is what is happening, okay. And then you validate your model with the experimental data. When you do modeling, there are hundreds of parameters, there are hundreds of constants whose values can be chosen. So, you tweak with those parameters and try to validate your model, and once the model is validated, you are sure that now one or two conditions when you validate, you are sure that your model is reasonably well, it is predicting the behavior well. Then you do not need to do experiments, you can actually use the model to do prediction, okay, and understand the physics that is happening inside the combustion chamber using modeling. So, modeling is all modeling of the IC engine processes is also fast emerging as a very important area of research. But then modeling alone is not enough, you have to actually validate all the models using experimental results, okay, using the images, using the data that is generated from optical diagnostic technique. Okay. So, that is why also the optical diagnostic technique is becoming extremely important. Now, you know, if you want to see inside the engine combustion chamber, there are many challenges. As I said, you know, for 100 years we could not do it, we are able to do it only in last couple of decades. Why? What are the challenges? First is very high non-steady pressure and temperature conditions, high mechanical and thermal stresses. If you look at the engine combustion chamber, what is happening? In the intake stroke, the pressure is 1 bar, suppose the engine is naturally aspirated, even if it is turbocharged, it will be 1.52 bar. Okay. So, you have 1 bar, and then when you compress, at the end of the compression it will be 20-30 bar. You inject the fuel, the combustion happens, the pressure will become 100 bar, 120 bar. In modern diesel engines, which are truck engines, for example, as high as 225 bar pressure is obtained. So, very high pressure, anywhere between 100 to 80, 100, depending on compression ratio, depending on load condition, the peak pressure will be like 50, 60, 70, 100 bar, and then in the exhaust again it will be subatmospheric pressure. And even a low speed engine will be operating at least 1500, 2000 RPM. If it is high speed, it could go up to 4000 RPM. So, 4000 RPM or 3000 RPM means that the combustion is happening in at least 25 cycles per second. So, all this pressure fluctuation from subatmospheric pressure to 100 bar and again to back to subatmospheric happens at least 25 times in 1 second. Okay. And the temperature can vary from 30 degree in the intake to as high as 2000 degree at the end of the combustion in certain locations. Average combustion chamber temperature can be 500, 600, 700 degrees centigrade depending on load and speed. It could be even higher. I mean, even in gasoline engines, sometimes the exhaust temperature at high load conditions is as high as 800 degrees centigrade. The manifold becomes red hot sometimes when you operate the engine at full load for very high time, very high duration, it can become red hot. Okay. We have experienced that in our lab as well. So, you see there is very high non-steady fluctuating pressure from very low temperature to very high temperature, okay, and very low pressure to very high pressure. So, this leads to very high mechanical stresses and very high thermal stresses. If it is metal can withstand such a fluctuating pressure. Can the glass withstand? Any kind of glass? It is extremely difficult. I mean, if you keep on pressing for example, any bottle, you know, or any glass bottle or glass cup, if you apply mechanical and thermal stresses at that rate, it will get converted into dust in no time. So, specialty materials are required. Then the second thing is that you want to see inside. Okay. So, if you want to see inside, obviously you cannot have any lubrication. What is lubrication? Lubricating oil, if you apply one thin layer of oil, what happens? You will not be able to see. I mean, you have to clean even your glasses. If you touch by hand even your body oil, if you touch the glass, you can't see through it, you have to clean it, right. So, even lubrication is not possible. Okay. Second thing is that, you know, if you make liner out of glass, liner heating takes place, so you have to keep it cool. Otherwise, it will, what happens is that you have to anyway make it a part of the cylinder. Now, cylinder has iron components and cylinder also has glass component, and glass and liner, they have different coefficients of thermal expansion, right. They do not have the same coefficient of thermal expansion. So, when they get heated, the coefficient of thermal, because of the different coefficient of thermal expansion, their dimensional change will be different from each other. So either it will start leaking or it will extra mechanical. If the coefficient of thermal expansion of glass is more, then what will happen? In the limited space it will expand more, so there will be more mechanical stress and it may crack, glass will crack in no time. Okay. So these are some of the challenges. Then fouling of the optical access window. So basically you see any combustion process, you will generate some particles, right. It is going to happen, especially in diesel engines. So diesel engines, I told you, because of the thermophoretic forces, the soot particles would like to come and stick to colder surfaces. And what is the colder surface in this case? The glass. Okay, so the soot particles will be pushed and they will deposit in the inside boundary of the glass. If after certain time you won't be able to see anything. So this is one big problem, that fouling of the optical window will happen and you need to clean it frequently. And in order to clean it, you have to dismantle the cylinder head, then clean it up, then put it back. So that is painful. Then you see supporting structure should not block the optical axis. Suppose you want to make a liner of glass. Now if you are having a metal liner, you do not need any support because the metal has certain strength. Now if you want to put a glass section inside, can you just have metal here, glass here, metal here and just paste it and hope that it will be able to withstand the kind of pressures that are experienced in the engine combustion chamber? Can it be done? It is not possible. So what you need to do is, suppose you have this cylinder, you provide one support here, one support here, one support here, one support here, and basically the lower metal part and the upper metal part, you try to squeeze the glass in between, so that lower structure is connected to the upper structure and glass is in between, squeezed in place. Now once you provide these structures, you will have problem in seeing what is happening, because these structures you can't see through the structures, only limited space. This you must have seen in the lab also, that only limited space is available. That creates a major problem in your measurements also. Then you see the other problem is that you need flat optical windows. If you have a glass, flat glass, if I put it like this, or if you see me through a flat glass, you will be able to see my image in undistorted form. But suppose you take a bottle which is curved and you see through the bottle, you try to look at me, I will be looking in funny shapes, right? Because the image is even the best quality glass with uniform thickness will give you a distorted image. Why? Because of the curvature. Now in the engine, you can only have such a section of bottle, the liner will be akin to a section of the bottle, it will be circular with uniform thickness. So that means whatever you will see inside, it will really not be an actual image, it will be a distorted image. So that image need to be corrected. You are interested in seeing what is actually happening, not a distorted image, right? Otherwise your conclusions may not be right. So what do you do to that? No. So what you do is you prepare some kind of a calibration plate. Okay, I will tell you what a calibration plate looks like. So calibration plate is nothing but a disc which is having spots at white marks at known distance, and you know exactly how much is this distance. These distances are normally equal distance. Okay? Now you put it inside a liner. Okay? And once you put it inside the liner, obviously this distance will change. When you look at from outside, this image will get distorted. So the distance between this and this will change, the distance between this and this will change, the distance between this and this will change. So, all these distances will change, okay. But you know what is the actual distance. So, you will make some kind of a correction file and you will apply that correction file to each image that you capture. So, suppose this is your glass liner, sorry. So, what you do is you put this disc here and you take the image from here. So, these distances will now not be equidistant because of the distortion. So, you will know how each image is getting distorted and you will apply those correction factors in the actual image that you capture, actual image of the combustion that you capture. So, this is the way in which you solve the problem of optical window. And then you see, one of the other things that happen is that there is aberration due to unwanted scattering. These glass surfaces sometimes they reflect light. So, this causes some problem. And then you see in many of the engines, cylinder liner is circular. What we have is a realistic engine geometry in our lab, it is also circular, but many of the optical engines where cold experiments are done, sometimes to avoid these optical flat window, what they do is they make rectangular window. So, basically they take 4 quartz and make it like this, and they have special geometry piston which are also circular. Obviously, it will not be a realistic engine geometry, you can't fire that engine, but you can certainly do cold studies. So, maintaining the realistic engine geometry is extremely challenging. What we have in our lab is the most realistic engine that is available in the market today, and the most sophisticated engine that is available anywhere in the world. Okay. So, so you see how do you get the optical access? So, usually the optical access is 2 types. One is the full optical access. Full optical access is what we have just talked about. Okay. So, you have a glass liner, okay, so transparent cylinder liner and a transparent piston head. So, that means you can have a piston whose top is made of glass. Okay. Whenever you want to take a image inside the engine it is all dark. So, if you want to take an image at a fast speed, lighting becomes extremely critical. Okay. So, faster you want to operate the camera, high level of illumination, higher level of illumination of the interrogation zone is required. Okay. For example, I think all of you must have done photography in your life, and those of you who have dealt with SLR camera, you must have seen that whenever there is a low light and you want to get a clear picture, what you do? You increase the aperture time. So, more exposure, so enough number of photons come and expose on the photographic film on the chip, and you get clear picture. When there is high illumination of the subject, you are able to get the picture very nice picture with even small exposure. So, what it really means, what I am trying to tell you is that if you do high speed imaging, the subject should be highly illuminated. If you are doing slow speed photography, even lower level of illumination is enough. Now, you are talking about optical diagnostics inside the engine. Inside the engine, and you are doing at high speed photography, inside the engine there is no light actually, and natural light, because the combustion is very weak, you can hardly capture it. Okay. So, illumination, very fast illumination is required, very high level of illumination is required. So, how do you illuminate? So, if you want to capture inside this engine, you have to make a sheet of light that should come and illuminate this plane in which you want to take the measurement. Okay. So, in order to do that, piston top should be transparent, otherwise you will not be able to do measurement. Okay. Or the other option can be that you illuminate this plane, put the laser sheet like this, and you visualize through the piston. Okay, I will show you how it is done. So, you need a transparent piston head and you also need a transparent cylinder liner. So, this is called full optical access. And then there could be endoscopic access. Endoscopic access really means, what is an endoscope? Endoscope is a surgical tool, right? Why it is used? Suppose you have some problem in some part of your body. What if the doctor wants to see, what choice does he have? He will cut you open and then see what is wrong. And then this large cut that you will have has to be sewed, and then it will take a lot of time for you to recover, and there will be high chances of infection. And suppose you start jogging at that time, it can even rupture. Lot of things, bad things can happen. So, it affects your structural integrity in some sense, right. So, instead what the doctors now do is, they make a small hole and they put a small rod. That rod has optical lenses, which is also called endoscope. So, just a small hole, and from another hole he puts a light source, and he makes another third hole from which he puts his tools, and first he inspects whichever area. So, he will put the light, he will inspect what is wrong and what is the area where he needs to operate. So, now he is able to see through without making a big wound, and then from the third hole he puts his tools, and he will cut wherever he has to do, cutting wherever suturing has to be done, he does it. Oh, all those tools are available which can enter through a small hole and do all the surgical procedures. Okay, and then he takes it out, and then it is a small hole. So, he just put one suture, and within within one day you can just resume your duties without much of a problem. Okay. So, basically it has revolutionized the medical industry. So, we have taken a cue from there, and we have revolutionized our life for our engines. Now, you see, if I have to buy such an engine, transparent engine, it is going to cost $2 million. Do you have that money? Answer is no, not everybody has that money, it is difficult. So, what is done is that you can have endoscopes, and endoscopes is just a thin rod. So, you can make a small hole in your cylinder head and make some provision and put that endoscope, and you can get nice pictures for what is happening inside the combustion chamber. So, at least the visualization part inside the engine combustion chamber, suppose you want to understand the spray, or you want to understand whether my spray is hitting the cylinder walls. If you are having a problem of lubricating oil dilution and you want to see that where my spray is hitting the cylinder walls and where the interaction with the lubricating oil is happening, how can you do it? So, that is done by endoscopy. So, you put an endoscope, on top of it you put a camera, and then you can capture the images. You can even capture the flame images using endoscopy. But one of the big problem in both of these optical access is that you need materials which can withstand high mechanical and thermal stresses. So, now in today's time, new materials such as quartz and sapphire have been developed. These materials are extremely strong and they can withstand very high level of mechanical and thermal stresses. So, this is one good thing that has happened. So, in full optical access, this optical access is maximized to allow application of complex optical diagnostic techniques. What are those techniques? I will discuss, while maintaining minimum necessary operability of the engine or engine component. Full optical access allows wide range of diagnostics to be applied. So, now one of the things is that the engine is operational, but you cannot really keep on firing it for a very long time. Why? Because the coefficient, the liner will get warm too much, and then its coefficient of thermal expansion will create problem, and there is a possibility that you may end up ruining your engine. So, these tests have to be done at very low speeds and low loads. You can't really go for full speed, full load conditions, and the tests firing can only be done for a limited period. Like for example, in our engine, we fire the engine for 30 seconds maximum, 30 seconds. Okay. But you can apply actually a wide range of diagnostics, lot of techniques can be employed in optical diagnostics, and the experiment is actually done in last 5 seconds. So, for 20 seconds you allow the engine to little bit warm up, so that you have more realistic condition, and in last 5 seconds you do investigations. For example, in our optical engine we try to understand what is the flow of the air, flow pattern of the air inside the combustion chamber using particle imaging velocimetry, 2D, 3D, tomographic, time resolved particle imaging velocimetry. So, in 5 seconds we are able to generate about 100 gigabytes of data. Now, you can imagine what kind of fast data transfer rate you will require between the camera and the computer to store or to transfer 100 gigabytes of data in only 5 seconds. So, the limitation is that you can't really go full load, full speed, you can't run the engine for very long time, but the plus point of this full access is that you can employ a wide range of diagnostic technique. Endoscopic access. In the endoscopic access, full engine operability is maintained while optical and diagnostic techniques are tailored for the diagnostic demand and the restraints on the engine operation. And endoscope access puts emphasis on organizing and extending realistic engine operating conditions. So, in optical access using endoscopy, what you can do is you can pick up any engine from assembly line. That means any engine of any company, production engine you can take, okay, 4 cylinder, 2 cylinder, 10 cylinder, whatever you have. You bring it to the lab, do the adaptation for endoscopy, and you can run it full blast, full speed, full load, you can run it without any problem. Endoscopy allows you to do that, okay. But the problem is that you can't employ a full range of diagnostics, you can only do high speed visualization using endoscopy. So, this is whenever fundamental investigations are required, optical diagnostics is preferred using full optical access, optical engines are preferred. Whenever development is required, you have to develop an engine, you have to sort out some issues with the engine, at that time the endoscopic access is preferred. So, these are the 2 dimensions of optical diagnostics. Do you understand? Now, you have seen already what the optical engine looks like, but this is the cylinder head, and you can see this is a pant-roof design of the cylinder head. This is 4 valve engine, 2 inlet and 2 exhaust valve. In the center you have spark plug or injector, whatever may be the case. If it is SI engine, it will be a spark plug. If it is CI engine, it will be a injector, and you can see this is the glass quartz liner, and here you see these 4 screws for posts, which is going to attach the cylinder head with the cylinder block. This is extremely important. These are big thick posts, actually they block lot of optical access, but this is necessary, okay. This is just an image of endoscopy. Now, if you look at the endoscopy, this is the endoscope. So, in the endoscopy you see this is the camera, very small camera is mounted. This is also not very fast, but very fast gate speed, okay. So, this camera is talking to the computer where the images are captured. This is the endoscope, this is the eyepiece. So, you see through it. Right now, instead of seeing through the eye, you have put camera on top of it. So, image will be reflected on the computer, and here you have something which is extremely important for engine applications. See, in the endoscope is like 4 millimeter pipe. It can be 4 millimeter, it can be 6 millimeter, 8 millimeter, depending on what endoscope you want. Endoscope has rod lenses, so it is full of rod lenses. So, every rod lens pair will invert the image, and by the time you get here, you will have straight image, okay. So, you capture the image here, but the problem is that this you are using inside an engine which is total metal, Now, inside an engine you can't see anything because there is no illumination. So, what you need to do is you need to make another hole, and in that another hole you put optical fiber, and what this optical fiber does is that it shines the light. It shines the light on the area which you want to capture. Okay. So, for example, this is a endoscopic image. You can see this is the piston, this is the injector, and here are the valves, and this is the spray. So, the idea here is to look at the spray, how the spray is coming out, and you see, so one side you are shining the light, from this side you are looking at the image. You can see this here, from this side you are shining the light, so this volume is illuminated. So, when the spray droplets come out in the combustion chamber, this light interacts and this is scattered, and that scattered light is captured by endoscope, and that is what you see on the screen in the form of this image. Okay. You are able to see me because there are so many light sources, they followed my body, and each part of my body is going to scatter the light, and that scattered light is captured by your eye, which is your camera, right. So, that is exactly what is happening inside the engine. So, this just shows the adaptation. What happens is this endoscope is a optical device, as I said, it does not like temperature, it hates temperature. The moment temperature goes beyond 150, the device is dead. Now, in the engine you already have temperature very high, and you are putting this in the combustion chamber where the temperature can be 350, 400 degree. So, how do you protect it? So, you protect it very smartly. What you do is you put some kind of a quartz tube, okay, and using that quartz tube, it's a finger like tube, it's like a test tube, end of the test tube, okay, and since it is quartz, it will be able to withstand the gases. It does not allow the exposure of hot gases to the endoscope, which is endoscope is inside. So, this endoscope is inserted, this is the outer sleeve, and you put the endoscope in the sleeve. You can actually rotate the endoscope to look at which zone you want to look at. Okay. And then, so this is inside the combustion chamber, but it is still inside here the temperature can be 400. So, there will be all processes taking place, there will be radiation, heat transfer, there will be convection heat transfer, conduction will be happening. So, this gets heated up. So, how do you cool it? So, that is what you do. You have to really think with the mind of an engineer. You have to cool it, endoscope. It is a 4 mm tube. You have to cool it, reduce the temperature to a level where it does not get damaged. So, what do? You can't put water. At the moment you put water, optical quality will be gone. You will not be able to see anything. So, what you do is you put the air here, air at 6 bar. So, the air, when you put it, the air travels through across the lenses. When the air travels, it will remove the heat, the air will get heated up. So, all the heat of the lenses which has come through different modes of heat transfer will be taken away by this air, and at the end of the endoscope there will be holes. So, from the endoscope it comes out and then it returns back outside, cooling the exterior. So, first it cools the interior, and then when it returns, it cools the exteriors of the endoscope, and that is why you are able to maintain 150 degree centigrade inside, I mean less than 150 degree centigrade for the endoscope. So, keeping the endoscope in integrity maintained is really a challenge for this application, and we have been successfully able to do it in engine.